So this is Undercurrent News' first series of podcasts, and I'm delighted to be speaking to David Webster, who is the enterprise lead for Cargill Animal Nutrition. And I think, David, that you started this role in the last year or two, and it's a pretty key role for Cargill.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's great to be with you here today. I'm pretty excited to talk about all the great things that are going on in our industry and also in Cargill in our animal nutrition and health business.
That's great. So, a lot of the readership and viewership of Undercurrent News are seafood entrepreneurs and industry executives. I just wanted to take it back a little bit. We've seen the big agriculture companies over the last 5 years kind of position themselves a little bit more downstream to animal protein markets. We've seen Cargill do this through the 2015 acquisition of Ewos and some other moves. And I just wondered, for the sake of my audience, if you could just describe that movement and kind of strategy into animal proteins.
Yeah, happy to, Matt. Yeah, it's a great story. Our animal nutrition business, we've been in the aquaculture space for many, many years. I started with Cargill back in 1992, so I'm coming up on my 29th anniversary. And back to 1992, we were already in the aquaculture business. Primarily, our business started in warm water species, mostly shrimp, mostly around the equator in different geographies. When I started, we had a small business even in the US at that time. And so we progressively grew our business organically over many years until it got to a point where we were quite comfortable to go much bigger. And that's when we started exploring the markets and what would be the right inorganic or acquisition to go after in order to accelerate our growth. And we had the great fortune at that time to get Ewos into the house of Cargill, and it was a great merger, and it's been a great partnership ever since. And like you said, that was 2015. And the growth in our business since 2015 has been quite significant.
Right. Would you say that was about the time that Cargill decided to focus a lot more on these markets and going further downstream to producing these feeds for aquaculture and other animal proteins?
Yeah, actually we launched a new strategy in our animal nutrition business back in 2008. And so really from that time forward, we were looking to accelerate our growth in the aquaculture space. And as any large multinational transaction and acquisition, as many examples, they take quite a few years to cultivate. And we made a couple of runs at different targets and different companies, but at the end of the day, Ewos was the one that we coveted, and we were able to get that deal done. So we're extremely happy with that.
Right, that's great. And I've heard from some industry executives in the past that the CEO of Cargill, Dave McLennan, at one point said the company is going to go long fish and maybe short hogs. I don't know if that was the expression used.
Well, yeah, that's a great statement by our CEO, Dave. He goes by DMAC. At the time we sold our US pork business, and it was just roughly, I don't remember the timing exactly, but approximately 6 months before we purchased Ewos. So it was a trade out of pork and a trade into healthier protein in seafood. And the timing was a little bit coincidental, but both were very strategic, moves for us.
Right. And it seems to be quite a good moment for to get into this business in 2015, when perhaps the salmon business, which Ewos is quite heavily exposed to, was going through a rough period. But then we had this 5-year period of extraordinary growth. I would say more kind of financial growth rather than production growth, but it's been a good ride.
Yeah, it's been a great investment for us. And first off, our cultures and values align very good with Ewos and Cargill, and so it was a very seamless transition and seamless fit, if you will. And then also, obviously, the customer base is very, very robust and very progressive. And the value chain has been a good investment into, right? In the value chain, whether you're in farming or in nutrition or in processing or distribution, it's been a good value chain to be a part of over the last 5 years, for sure.
Sure. And more recently, well, a lot of people have said that, that the FAO, the FAO, has said that aquaculture is the fastest growing protein segment. Just to take that forward a little bit into this COVID pandemic environment, do you still think that's the case? And maybe we could get a little bit of your vision of where these animal protein markets are going.
Yeah, obviously, excuse me, obviously we find ourselves in a very unique set of circumstances with COVID around the world and the impact that that's had on global economies, but also in terms of consumption and consumption patterns. In terms of seafood and aquaculture, it definitely is a short-term impact. It's if you just take the U.S. for example, prior to the pandemic, most seafood was consumed in the food service segment, and the U.S. is a big destination market for seafood. And by having so many lockdowns and having so many of the restaurants closed, the food service segment virtually dried up for a period of time. And Americans at that time probably weren't all that comfortable or all that skilled with cooking seafood at home. Now, the good thing and that's just the US example. A European example, very similar, but much more of seafood is sold in retail and food service. It's a much more balanced market. Also being, one of the largest, if not the largest destination markets for seafood. So the European demand was hurt for sure, but was a little bit more resilient than the US demand. And so in the short term, we've had a negative impact on producers around the world, no question about that. And it's been a challenging period of time, challenging year. We are very optimistic though for the future. And we do think actually, having certain destinations market learn how to cook seafood differently and at home, get more comfortable, etc. We think actually demand is going to be much stronger as we come out of the pandemic and markets normalize and economies recover. And, so we're extremely optimistic. I would call, salmon growth at, minimum 3, but 3 to 5, maybe even 6% a year out into the future. And shrimp being the other key species at 5+, maybe even up to 7% growth out into the future. So we're investing heavily, and we've been around 155 years as a company, and so we're not looking at this in kind of 1 to 2 year increments. We're taking the long position, and we're investing as such.
That's great. That's great. And a lot of consumers, what we've been hearing and looking at different studies, people are cooking at home. If we focus a little bit on the American market, there's kind of two trends: people cooking at home, cooking up salmon fillets for the first time, or seafood species, and also people kind of thinking about their immune system and consuming more seafood. Which would you say is like the most significant of those trends? And how do you think that they're going to last over time as people resume their busy lifestyles, or perhaps don't care about getting sick with COVID?
Yeah, Matt, that's a fantastic question. I don't know the answer to your question specifically, but I can give you some anecdotes. We also have an animal and human health business. We bought a company by the name of Diamond V in 2018, and it's a great company as well. And in that product portfolio, we have some human health and immunity supplements, and we've seen that product portfolio skyrocket over the last year. So there is this consumer knowledge about connecting nutrition and health to immunity, and thinking about what can I do to boost my immunity system. And of course, as we know, seafood and particularly salmon is very good for that, along with what we call prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. The company that we have in Diamond V specializes in postbiotics, and this goes right to the human microbiome and adds significant value in strengthening an individual's immunity.
Right.
So it's hard to say exactly, to answer your question, whether it's, the cooking at home craze that we've been so in certain regard forced into, or whether it's people looking for a healthier lifestyle and more immunity in their diet. I think it is both, but I don't know what the percentages are of each. It'd be hard to tell.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess the question is, do you think that the customers, perhaps if we talk in terms of customer acquisition, whether those customers will stay, people who are starting to learn how to cook up a salmon fillet at home for the first time, whether you think,
Yeah, I don't have any scientific data, but my short answer is yes, absolutely. I think in both accounts, right? I think people are much more self-aware and conscientious about what they put in their body to stay healthy and to boost their immunity. So I think both we'll see on the supplement side and the immunity side more products coming to market, and more inclusion in consumers' diets for immunity products. And also I think people are going to cook seafood more regularly at home. I think it's just inevitable. So again, going back to the market growth that I talked about earlier, for me, that factors into the market growth, that we have expanded our access to the market via cook at home.
right, right, that's great. And this week, the National Fisheries Institute held their annual conference virtually, and there was a lot of food distribution companies talking about consumer euphoria if as we reach herd immunity through the vaccines and people going out to restaurants and the kind of party atmosphere. Are you kind of baking that into your outlook for the future?
Yes, yes, yes. I think the rebound effect. People crave social interaction, and it's hard to hold society down or lock down for too long, and we need that interaction. And even here we're located. I'm broadcasting here today from Minnesota in the U.S. and our restaurants recently opened up to 25% capacity here in the last couple of weeks after Christmas, after the holiday surge, and our numbers have came down, so we're open. And it's hard to find a reservation. They're booked so far out in advance because everybody has a deep desire to get out and socialize. So vaccines can't come soon enough. We need to make progress around the world in all countries, not just the developed countries, but for sure the developing countries. And I would look out to that September, October, November timeframe, hopefully sooner, but that's when I would think that the strong recovery would start to occur.
Right, right. And actually, that's a nice way of getting into my next question, which is if we look at the economic outlook for the world, I think there's kind of a consensus around growth, perhaps in the Asian region. It's kind of at the moment it's the only region growing in the world, and maybe slower growth in the rest of the world. How does that affect your strategy when you're continuing to invest in seafood, aquaculture?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good question. Again, I'll reference back to an earlier comment. We are taking the long look at the industry and the opportunities when we think about our strategy. And over a longer period of time, we want to bet on Asia Pacific. No question about that. So we have opportunities in our portfolio today that we want to go after to grow our business and grow our footprint, grow our influence and impact in the particularly in the Southeastern Asian markets, but also then China as well.
Right, right. And I was recently listening to a webinar with Joe Stone. He was speaking to the U.S. Soybean Export Council. And I think he made the comment that Indonesia, you were talking about those Southeast countries, could see a huge kind of multiple increase in poultry demand. With that, do you think that also holds true for seafood?
Yeah, for sure in those geographies, seafood is an important part of the diet. And, we have an emerging aquaculture business in Indonesia. It is a country that we've targeted for growth. There are some high valued regional species in the Southeast Asian countries that we're targeting, along with shrimp. Those would be our two primary focuses in that region. And we do have a good foothold in Vietnam and Thailand. And we for sure want to grow significantly in those two countries, but also we want to grow in Indonesia and India as well. Those would be the four key countries that we have targeted in that particular geography. And then as you can well imagine, China.
Right, right. What's your outlook for China, and the recovery of seafood demand? You know, we've seen these mixed messages from authorities with sanitary checks and obviously produce getting held up at the border. Seems like the Chinese consumer is a little bit scared or maybe confused. How do you think that market will evolve now from where we are?
You know, Matt, it's really hard for me to know exactly. Um, you know, China is such an interesting dynamic environment. We've been in China for a long time. I think our first facility in China was in the late 90s. So, you know, we've got a strong presence there. We've got a good network. We have a fairly agile and resilient organization on the ground that is basically mostly, you know, it serves the domestic market, and it is in a domestic organization in general. And they're quite agile to respond to the shifting consumer needs and the dynamics in the market. So I don't know that I have a good gauge or a good you know, feel for how the recovery is going to go in China, but I can tell you that the dip hasn't been very low. You know, we've been able to, you know, there's some converging factors because you had a big gap in protein supply in China from ASF. You know, obviously pork, but that gap in supply from pork buoyed many of the other protein markets during that period. Now, there's been a dramatic recovery in the market from ASF. The swine herd is repopulated much faster than we anticipated it to repopulate. We've been a part of that in terms of some of our biosecurity and immunity products that we have for the swine industry in that market. So a lot of our farms are being able to repopulate without contracting ASF again. So, but that recovery has been very swift and robust. So that will also play into seafood demand in that market as those protein consumption patterns shift given what's available in the market.
Right, right. That's interesting. And we've heard that, you know, China in its recovery from ASF has looked at, and maybe even, you know, some of the you know, the doubts around the origins of coronavirus, but looking at building different types of facilities to raise the hogs and basically improve that industry by making companies that perhaps look a little bit more like a Tyson or a Smithfield rather than smaller scale facilities. Do you kind of see that trend happening in seafood in the Asian region, where obviously a lot of the farms are very smallholder farms and maybe don't use the best practices with every part of aspect of farming?
You know, market maturity and market progression is, you know, there's so many drivers and so many dimensions to what causes that to happen in every geography. It's hard to tell exactly. We've always employed, you know, we have presence, we have physical asset present in 42 countries, and we have employees in over 60 countries. And so we have countries that are at extremely different points in the maturity curve across that spectrum. And so our philosophy, it doesn't really matter where you're at in that maturity curve. We have somewhere in the world in our portfolio have experienced what that country is going through. So we just try and stay agile and flexible and keep our people resilient in terms of how do we bring new solutions, how do we bring new capabilities to the customers that find themselves in a particular point in that maturity curve, and where are they going to the next point in the maturity curve, and then what do they need from us to help them be successful in doing that. That's how we think about it, Matt. I know it's kind of a complicated answer, but you know, it's going to take some time. You know, the infrastructure around aquaculture in China is very intricate, right? And there are a lot of smallholders, and there is a societal impact with smallholders, and we believe in farmer livelihood. So we'll help as many farmers as we can be successful, and the market dynamics will determine who ultimately is there at the end.
Right, right. That's great. And we're hearing from a lot of seafood distributors and perhaps the mid-chain players. We had an executive from Laborie on one of our recent webinars who was really kind of quite adamant that the welfare aspect of seafood is going to become a huge issue. If it isn't already, it's going to become a lot bigger. And I think Cargill actually has been, might be have more to say about the welfare aspects of the industry this year. And perhaps you could give me a little sense of where you are positioned with regard to the message surrounding welfare of aquaculture species.
Yeah, so fish, yeah, just to make sure we're on the same page here, you're referencing fish welfare.
Fish welfare.
Yeah, fish welfare is a super important topic for us. You can see actually in some of our recent innovations and new products. We've got a product on the market now, I think for the last 2 years, called Dermic, and it's a nutrition program. One of the big challenges in the salmon industry is sea lice. As you're an expert as much as I am, Matt, in this industry. So you know this, and your viewership knows this extremely well. We've been specifically trying to innovate and create new solutions to help solve sea lice problems. And our Dermic program, it's a great program that's taken off. It's growing tremendously because it helps fish recover after they've been treated for sea lice 40% faster than any other product out there. That's what our trials indicate, and that's what our customers tell us. So, we're trying to create and invent new solutions every day that improve fish welfare. Another thing that we've been thinking about and activating and investing in is what we call essential nitrogen. And just thinking about the specific nitrogen needed at each stage of a fish's life so that they're healthier, but more importantly, healthier and they're productive, but more importantly, that we don't excrete unnecessarily high levels of nitrogen into the environment and into the water. And so we can minimize nitrogen excretion to a bare minimum. And this is a new technology that we're in the process of bringing to the market now. So those are just a couple of examples around fish welfare that we're honed in on, and we will continue to invest in our innovation portfolio to bring fish welfare systems to the market.
Right. That's very interesting. I think last year Moe, the CEO Ivan Windheim, talked about an increased focus on the small details of farming as being the kind of, there's no silver bullet here, but let's focus on on farming well and in much greater detail and sort of these small breakthroughs. Do you I guess some of these innovations that you're rolling out would be part of that evolution of the industry, right?
Yeah, Matt, that's exactly right. If I think about the other area we haven't talked about yet, but the other area that allows us to really unlock incremental value and efficiency and ultimately sustainability for our producers is digital technologies. So if you think about some of the new capabilities that are emerging, whether they're via tech startups or whether they're from companies like ourselves that are investing heavily in this space, you see the opportunity to put technology tools in the hands of farmers to make better decisions. And in some cases, they may just be, to your point, a series of incremental improvements that add up to a big improvement. Or in other cases, it may be, actual big improvements right up front. But, so for example, in the aquaculture space, we have a capability that we're investing in called Aquatic, which is really helping. At this point, we're focused on shrimp, and at this point, we're really focused on helping shrimp farmers improve the health and welfare of their shrimp in the ponds by monitoring their behavior and their movement and understanding when to feed, how to feed, automatic feed, and getting them to market in a much more productive, effective, efficient way, and ultimately lowering their cost of production, and at the same time having more shrimp out of the pond.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think one of the, across, if you look at this, there's been a huge wave of money going into ag tech. I think Ag Thunder has a very nice kind of illustration of deal flow. And there's a lot of money that's going into improving the food industry globally. but perhaps the adoption rates of this technology are not quite matching that kind of dollar inflow. I wonder, for example, if do you think that could be an issue with aquaculture as well, where there's maybe great new digital solutions out there for, say, shrimp farmers, but the uptake or adoption of these things is not quite where it should be?
Yeah, it's a good call out, Matt. If you think about agriculture, venture capital invested about 7.6 billion in upstream food and agriculture in 2019. And in 2017, that was 4.2 billion. So you think about that increase in, digital disruption and technology solutions into our space. And that's all of animal agriculture and food, not just seafood and aquaculture, of course. But so there's a huge influx of capital, and we're a part of that. We're investing heavily in digital capabilities to, like I said, to help farmers and producers make better decisions. Okay, so if you think about that, what are some of the barriers? Well, one of the barriers has been, tradition or lack of adoption, given the way methodologies and farmers think about how they're producing their crop, if you will. I do think today's environment and COVID, one benefit, we all hate that COVID has happened, and we for sure would wish it had never happened to the global economy and to the people that have suffered from it. Um, and one thing that's the reality is people are more virtually enabled and digitally enabled, and we see a change in mindset with many of our customers that are willing to adopt technology much quicker today, for many different reasons, right? One, just because they're used to it, but two, they see it as a necessity for survival and resilience. And three, potentially it makes them more productive in terms of being reliant on technology and people versus people only. So I think it's a combination of factors that cause mindset shifts in our customer base around the world. So we're seeing a pickup in adoption of some of our technology solutions. Now, the other aspect of that is connectivity. We need to get the rural population around the world connected so that they can benefit not only from an education perspective, but also from a productivity and an economic perspective for their operations and their businesses.
Right, right. That's fantastic. And so you perhaps you're seeing at the moment that there's a greater adoption of these digital technologies in the current environment. Let's say, for example, Aquatic. Have you seen strong adoption rates in recent times?
Yeah, we've been rolling out Aquatic as a kickoff, and much more than a pilot, because it's not a test per se, but we've tried to narrow in the focus to go as deep and fast as we could, and we've picked the Ecuadorian market. As we all know, and the shrimp market in Ecuador is a fantastic market, and it's growing. It's quite progressive. They've got some of the best product in the world. And so we've focused our initial efforts in Ecuador, and the adoption rate has been quite incredible. The number of cycles, and the number of ponds times the number of cycles on those ponds, we've grown over, I think, 500-600% over the last 6 months in terms of adoption. So we're ramping up quickly. But yeah, we've got to have the capacity to ramp up too, and the hardware for the ponds and the tools. So we build the system, steadily over time, but we've expanded quite rapidly here in the last 6 to actually 9 months.
Okay, that's great. And I just wondered, we do see Cargill across different animal protein categories as actually being a grower themselves. Is this something that we could eventually see with seafood? Do you think Cargill will move into that?
Fundamentally, Cargill, we aren't farmers. So we're a food company. We're a supply chain company, and we're a value-added consultative nutrition company. And so, will we be in farming? We might have a small piece of our business in farming, but that's not our primary strategic direction. We're a nutrition company in the aquaculture space, and in the animal protein space. Seafood is important for us in the future. We will grow and expand into seafood protein. we're one of the largest protein producers and players in the world in Cargill. One of my peers leads the animal protein business for Cargill. And between his business and my business, we are actively, thinking about how do we go further down the supply chain, the value chain, into seafood processing and distribution, and what role does Cargill play in that? So as part of that value chain, depending on how we grow, whether we grow organically or inorganically, there could be some companies out there that have some stake in farming that it would be fine for us. So we'll see how things progress and how it evolves. But like I said, when you're a 155-year-old company, you're looking towards the future on what the next value chain is that Cargill has, a legitimate right to win and play in, and we think, not only aquaculture but seafood in general is a place for us for the future.
Sure, sure. And just to kind of to add to that, would you say that looking at going further downstream to raise certain species, would you be looking to the thinking behind that, I guess, wouldn't be to build lots of volume and market share, but perhaps as a way to illustrate good practices? Maybe would that be the strategy?
Yeah, one of the I think your audience is probably pretty well read and very well educated on supply chain transparency. If we think about traceability and fish welfare and thinking about the entire value chain, one of the roles that Cargill can help play in the industry is to bring that transparency to the retail and food service market, to make sure that our downstream customers, whether it's some of the large food service players or the restaurant chains themselves in certain geographies, or the retailers of the world, the Tesco's, the Walmarts of the world, they look to companies like Cargill to help them bring assured supply and transparency in the supply chain to make sure their objectives are met, whether that's sustainability objectives or whether that's farmer welfare objectives, or whatever it may be. So, and that's something that Cargill has a lot of skill at, and we've got a lot of capability in different parts of Cargill in our various businesses. So we think that that's an opportunity for us in the seafood arena as well.
Right, right. Because there's obviously quite a lot of divergence in the seafood space. If you look at the salmon
Yes.
industry, there's a lot of companies that are sustainably certified with the ASC, and we see initiatives like the GSI, although there are some lingering doubts around some farming practices. Then we look at perhaps some segments that you're into, like shrimp, where there isn't that much certification or sustainably certified shrimp, and at the same time the markets are demanding this. So could you, I don't want to corner you into an answer here, but would you be looking for a species like shrimp and salmon, for example?
Yeah, if you think about what our strategy lines up for where we want to grow, I think I mentioned earlier, for sure in shrimp and salmon. We have a very strong presence in salmon, obviously. We're one of the leaders in the market around the world, and we will continue to invest in technology and capabilities as new novel systems emerge, like RAS or deep water farming, et cetera. We'll continue to invest in those areas as well, so that we can be a leading nutrition provider in the salmon space. Shrimp, we don't have the presence that we want to have in shrimp, and we're going to grow. It might take us a little bit of time. We're going to have to build over time, et cetera. But no, we think it's a species and a value chain that we can add significant value to from end to end.
Right.
We don't necessarily anticipate being in farming of shrimp. That's not really our objective. But depending on how we enter, there are quite a few companies out there that are in the full value chain. So it depends on whether we grow organically or inorganically, what destination we have. But for sure, from the nutrition and downstream in terms of processing and distribution, shrimp is an opportunity for Cargill.
Yeah, that's great. It's fascinating. Just I'm mindful that I'm using up a lot of time, and I've just got a couple of questions, so we're almost done. just the plant-based movement really exploded over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Do you think that seafood can live alongside plant-based proteins? Or do you think plant-based might cannibalize seafood demand? How do you view that sector?
I think it's an and. I think it's an and. You know, Cargill's always thrived on two things: listening to consumer choices and free trade. Those are two fundamentals in Cargill. And if you think about consumer choice, people are looking for healthy alternatives basis how they define that, right? So plant protein is going to grow. There's no doubt about that. But animal protein is going to grow as well. And so we think it's a yes and that, we are a protein company by definition, and we are excited about that, and we're going to continue to invest in animal protein and the supply chains associated with animal protein. And we're a veg protein company. We're one of the biggest vegetable seed processors in the world, and we have one of the largest refined oils, edible oils businesses in the world, and we have some good all natural protein businesses like pea protein that we've recently invested in. So we'll invest in both. The caloric intake and capacity for protein moving out into the future is pretty dramatic. So there's some gaps to be filled, and we think nobody better to fill that than Cargill. So we're gonna focus on that.
Right, perfect. And one of I guess one of the concerns of the seafood industry has been, and we've seen a lot of statements from the producers over the last couple of years, is about the sustainability of soy, the origin of soy. There seemed to be a little bit of concern with Brazil in the last year or two. Could you just talk a little bit about how Cargill is addressing those concerns within the industry?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Matt. It's a complex issue. There's no doubt. If you think about our role, we're a leader and an innovator in the aquaculture nutrition space, and we focus on high value solutions that reduce the impact of our industry on the planet. And we take this responsibility extremely serious. And so for sure, if we haven't wavered on our commitment to end deforestation. We've made that commitment numerous years ago, and we're fighting for that every day. So we're trying to accelerate our effort. We're trying to accelerate our effort to achieve 100% deforestation. It's a complicated issue, and there's lots of different dynamics and lots of different dimensions to how we get there. One of the key things I just want to call out is farmer engagement. Before I was in this job, I had the opportunity to be leading our edible oils business for Cargill, and obviously we're in the palm oil supply chain, and I saw firsthand the impact that a company like Cargill can have to help shift and change an industry. Now, it was an industry effort along with many other stakeholders, but we've seen great strides in improving sustainability and ending deforestation in the palm oil supply chain by working collectively across borders, across boundaries, across ideals to come together. And at the center of that is farmer engagement. And so if we think about the soy supply chain, that's Cargill's view as well. We believe in regeneration and restoration, and we believe in farmer engagement. And we're going to do everything we can to make a real difference on the ground to have an impact that's positive. That's not easy, and it's going to take some time, but I believe we'll persevere and we'll have a meaningful impact on deforestation.
Right. And on that subject, we've heard so much about innovative ingredients going into feed. And it does appear to be like a silver bullet solution, or is presented as such. But at the same time, like many of these things, there may be smaller incremental improvements that can be done to existing established industries, such as the farming industry. Would you say that there's kind of a mixture of both? And what importance do you apportion to the novel ingredients in that?
Well, I think you've talked to a few of my colleagues in the past about novel ingredients and, insect protein being the most visible and potentially the most viable today. And so we're looking very closely at the emergence of insect protein, and we do have a partnership with InnovaFeed. Um, this is an exciting area and a real opportunity uh, to create a different cycle of improvement in how we think about sustainability and how we utilize our resources. So I'm excited about insect protein as a new alternative within our industry. And I think, you've heard Helene Ziv, our leader around risk management and sourcing, talk about that numerous times. She and I work together very closely in thinking about how do we invest, what's the next area of improvement. It's an emerging capability, though, emerging technology, emerging area, and we have to make sure that the economics are sound, the scale up, to go from small, let's say benchtop or pilot plant scale to full on industrial scale to supply many producers and manufacturers around the world is going to take some time. These things don't happen overnight, but it looks very promising today, and we're really excited about it. And you'll probably see us continue, to make some investments in this area as well.
That's fantastic. Well, David Webster, thanks so much for agreeing to participate in this webinar. It's been a pleasure, and we've got some great insights for the seafood industry. So I'm delighted we're able to do that. And hope you have a good weekend.
Hey, Matt, just one final comment from my side.
Yeah.
We've all lived through this COVID situation for the last virtually a year now, and
Right.
I've just been incredibly proud to be part of the ag and food space. The resilience that we've all shown, and all of our employees and our customers and the entirety of the value chain, I just think is it's such a great story to think back over the last year and to see what we together as an industry in food and ag have accomplished in keeping all of our value chains moving and all of the people around the world, fed. And it's just remarkable. And I just feel so lucky that we have great colleagues, not only in Cargill that I'm proud to work with, but also across our industry. It really is meaningful and creates a sense of purpose. And I think it's going to be a new opportunity for us to attract talent to the industry to continue to do a better job of feeding the world more sustainably and responsibly as we go forward. So thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation, Matt. I hope it adds value for your readership.